The old farmhouse creaked in the autumn wind as I sat in Granddad's study, surrounded by memories and dust. Most of the family had already left after the will reading, their quick footsteps and excited chatter about their inherited treasures fading into the distance. But I stayed, running my fingers over the weathered desk where my grandfather had taught me everything he knew about the land. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'd just inherited what my family called the worthless 100 acres, a stretch of supposedly unproductive farmland that had been in our family for 3 generations. To them, it was a burden, a money pit that had never yielded more than modest crops. To me, it was everything. Well, Aunt Patricia's voice cut through my thoughts. She lingered in the doorway, designer handbag clutched tight as if afraid the farmhouse dust might taint it. Still here, Sarah? Trying to figure out how to pay the property taxes on your inheritance? I looked up, meeting her smug expression with calm. Just remembering, Aunt Patricia, Granddad spent a lot of time in this room. Yes, wasting away over geological surveys and soil samples. She waved dismissively. At least Margaret and I got something worthwhile. The investment portfolio, the city properties, real assets. If only she knew what those geological surveys had really shown. What Granddad had discovered in his final years after decades of methodical research. What he told me during those long evenings when I was the only one who bothered to visit. The land has secrets, Sarah, he'd say, spreading out his maps and charts. Secrets that only reveal themselves to those patient enough to look beneath the surface. I'd learned patience from him, spending weekends helping him collect soil samples, learning to read the subtle signs in the earth's layers. While my cousins chased city careers and Aunt Patricia complained about the embarrassing family farm, I was earning my geology degree and beginning to understand exactly what made this land special. You know, Aunt Patricia continued, examining her manicure, we could take it off your hands. A small cash payment, save you the trouble of maintaining this place. Her gesture encompassed the whole property, dripping with disdain. That's very thoughtful, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. But I think I'll hold on to it, for sentimental reasons. She snorted delicately. Sentiment doesn't pay bills, dear. But suit yourself. Don't come crying to us when you can't afford the upkeep. After she finally left, the sound of her expensive car crunching down the gravel driveway, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text. They're gone. Bring in the team. Within an hour, 3 unmarked vans pulled up to the farmhouse. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the head geologist I'd been quietly consulting with for months, stepped out first. Ready to confirm your grandfather's theory, Sarah? I nodded, leading them to the barn where Granddad had stored all his research. The wall panels creaked as I removed them, revealing dozens of carefully organized boxes, 30 years of soil samples, stratigraphic analyses, and detailed maps. Your grandfather was brilliant, Alana said, examining his meticulous notes. He recognized the geological markers decades before anyone else was looking here. The only question is whether the deposits extend as far as he predicted. I spread out his final map on the workbench. Red circles marked the areas he'd identified as most promising, with detailed notes about soil composition and mineral indicators. He spent his last years documenting everything, making sure there could be no doubt. The team worked through the night, setting up their equipment across the property. Modern ground-penetrating radar and electromagnetic surveys would either confirm or disprove what Granddad had spent decades piecing together through careful observation and analysis. I stayed in the study, reviewing his journals. The latest entries revealed how much he'd understood about what was coming. Sarah will know what to do with this information. While the others chase quick profits, she understands the value of patience, of looking deeper. The minerals we found could transform this region, but only if developed responsibly. I'm leaving the land to her not because it's worthless, but because she's the only one who knows its true worth. Dawn was breaking when Alina rushed into the study, her eyes bright with excitement. Sarah, the preliminary results. Your grandfather was right. The rare earth deposits are exactly where he predicted, and the concentrations, they're higher than anything we've seen in North America. I nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Granddad had discovered one of the largest rare earth mineral deposits outside of China, elements crucial for everything from smartphones to electric vehicles. He kept it secret, knowing that hasty development could destroy both the land and the community he loved. What's the market value? I asked quietly, though I already had a rough idea. Alina's hands trembled slightly as she showed me the initial analysis. Conservative estimate: the mineral rights alone could be worth billions. With proper sustainable development, she trailed off, the numbers speaking for themselves. I thought about Aunt Patricia's smirk, about all the times my family had mocked Granddad's obsession with this land, about how they fought over his investment portfolio, never understanding that his real legacy lay beneath their feet. But this wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about fulfilling the vision Granddad had shared with me during those long evenings in his study, a vision of responsible development that could provide jobs for generations while preserving the land's essential character. My phone buzzed, a message from Aunt Patricia. "Dear Margaret and I have been talking. We really think you should reconsider our offer for the farm. Say $50,000. Better than watching it sit empty." I set the phone aside without replying. The next few days would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire region. The quiet farm they dismissed as worthless was about to become the center of a technological revolution. But first, I had a promise to keep. Before any announcements, before any development plans, I had to ensure this discovery would be handled the way Granddad had wanted. The documents were already prepared: a comprehensive plan for sustainable mining, environmental protections, and community benefit sharing. Alana watched me reviewing the contracts. "You know," she said carefully, "once this goes public, everything changes. Your family." "I know," I replied, thinking of the coming storm. But Granddad always said the true value of anything lies in how you use it, not just what it's worth. The morning sun streamed through the study windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Somewhere on the property, the survey team was gathering more evidence of what we found. Soon, I would have to face my family again, this time with very different news. But for now, I sat at Granddad's desk, reading through his final journal entry one more time. To see what others overlook, to understand what others dismiss. That's where true value lies. Sarah knows this. She'll make the right choices when the time comes. The time had come, and I was ready. The conference room at Morton and Price law offices felt a world away from Granddad's dusty study. My family filed in, summoned by an urgent message about critical new information regarding the Mitchell estate. Aunt Patricia and Aunt Margaret swept in last, both wearing expressions that mixed annoyance with poorly concealed curiosity. "This better be important," Patricia sniffed, settling into a leather chair. "Some of us have real business to attend to." I caught Mr. Morton's eye and nodded slightly. The elderly lawyer, who had handled our family's affairs for 30 years, cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. Ms. Mitchell has discovered some significant information about her inherited property that affects the entire estate." Oh, Margaret leaned forward. Has she finally realized she can't afford to keep that money pit? "Actually," I said quietly, pushing a stack of folders across the table, "I'm here to discuss the mineral rights survey that just completed." I watched their faces as they opened the reports, waiting for the moment of recognition. Patricia spoke first, her voice sharp. "What is this? Rare earth elements? What kind of joke?" "No joke, Aunt Patricia," I interrupted, nodding to Alina, who had been waiting by the door. "Dr. Rodriguez, would you please explain what we found?" Alina stepped forward, spreading out detailed geological maps and survey results. The Mitchell property sits on one of the largest deposits of rare earth elements ever discovered in North America. The preliminary surveys indicate concentrations that could revolutionize domestic supply for high-tech manufacturing. The room erupted in chaos. My cousins James and Michael, who hadn't even bothered to visit Granddad in his final years, suddenly became very interested in his worthless land. Margaret's hands trembled as she read through the market valuations. Patricia's face had gone pale. "This is impossible," she whispered. "That land never produced anything but wheat and corn." "That's where you're wrong," I replied, pulling out Granddad's journals. He knew. He spent decades mapping it, studying it, preparing for this moment. He just needed someone who would understand how to develop it responsibly. "Then we'll contest the will." Patricia slapped her hand on the table. He wasn't in his right mind, leaving such valuable property to... "I wouldn't advise that," Mr. Morton interjected smoothly. "Your father was quite explicit in his wishes, and quite sound of mind. Moreover, he produced another document. He left very specific instructions about attempted challenges to the inheritance." I watched my family read the clause that would redirect their own inheritances to charity if they contested the will. Granddad had thought of everything. But this isn't fair. Margaret sputtered. We're family. You have to share. Actually, I cut in. I do want to discuss sharing. Not ownership. That's non-negotiable, but benefits. I gestured to Alina, who distributed another set of documents. This is my development plan for the property. The plan laid out a vision that went far beyond simple mineral extraction. Sustainable mining practices, a research center for rare earth recycling technology, job training programs for local residents, green energy implementation, and yes, a family profit-sharing arrangement, but one tied to community benefit metrics. The minerals aren't going anywhere, I explained. We can take the time to do this right, to create something that benefits everyone, not just the shareholders. This is business, not charity, Patricia snapped, but I could see uncertainty in her eyes as she reviewed the projected revenues. Even a smaller percentage of such vast returns would dwarf what she'd inherited. No, Aunt Patricia, this is legacy. This is what Granddad was building toward all along. I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city. He knew that true wealth isn't just about money. It's about what you create, what you leave behind. The next hour was a blur of questions, negotiations, and gradual acceptance of the new reality. James and Michael, once they got over their initial anger, became interested in the technical aspects of the operation. Margaret, ever practical, focused on the financial projections. Even Patricia, though she tried to maintain her disdain, couldn't hide her excitement at the possibilities. By evening, preliminary agreements were signed. The family would have minority profit participation, but control would remain firmly in my hands, bound by the sustainable development framework Granddad had envisioned. As the lawyers wrapped up the paperwork, Elena pulled me aside. You know, she said quietly, most people would have just sold to the highest bidder, taken the money and run. I smiled, thinking of those evening discussions in Granddad's study. That's not what this land needs. It's not what he wanted. And it's not what I want either. The transformation began slowly, deliberately. We started with comprehensive environmental surveys, community consultations, and pilot programs for sustainable extraction methods. The old farmhouse became the project's research headquarters, its rooms now filled with scientists and engineers instead of dust and memories. 6 months later, I stood in Granddad's study, now my office, looking out over the property. Solar panels glinted in the distance, powering our initial operations. A new training center was rising near the old barn, where local residents would learn high-tech skills for the future workforce. Patricia visited unexpectedly one afternoon, looking somewhat uncomfortable. I've been thinking about what you said about legacy, she began hesitantly. About creating something lasting. I nodded, waiting. Your grandfather, he wasn't just collecting soil samples all those years, was he? He was building a future, one that needed the right person to bring it to life. He knew what was coming, I replied. The technological revolution, the need for rare earth elements, the importance of developing them responsibly. He just needed someone who would see the land the way he did. And we all thought he was wasting his time, she said softly. We were so wrong. The project continued to grow, but always with careful attention to Granddad's principles. The mining operation was a model of environmental responsibility. The research center began developing new recycling technologies. Local schools started offering specialized technical training programs. 1 year after the initial discovery, I sat at Granddad's desk, reviewing the latest progress reports. The property had indeed transformed, but not into the industrial wasteland many had feared. Instead, it was becoming a hub of innovation and sustainable development. The phone rang. Another offer from a major technology company wanting to buy us out. I declined politely, as I had dozens of times before. The true value of this land wasn't in a one-time sale, but in the future we were building. Later that evening, walking the property as the sun set, I thought about how appearances can deceive. To my family, this had been worthless dirt. To Granddad, it was a key to the future. He'd understood that real value isn't always visible on the surface. Sometimes you have to dig deeper, look longer, think beyond the obvious. The old farmhouse still creaked in the wind, but now it was full of life and purpose. In the distance, lights glowed from the research center where teams worked on next-generation recycling technologies. The land was still providing for people, just in a way nobody except Granddad had imagined. I pulled out his final journal, rereading the passage that had guided every decision. The land tells its own story if you're patient enough to listen. Its value isn't just in what you can take from it, but in what you can create with it. Sarah understands this. She'll write the next chapter. And that's what we were doing, writing the next chapter of a story that began with an old man collecting soil samples, seeing possibilities where others saw only worthless dirt. The family that had laughed at his obsession now proudly talked about his vision, though they still didn't fully understand it. But I understood. Every morning, watching the sunrise over the property, I saw what Granddad had seen, not just mineral deposits and market values, but potential. Potential for innovation, for sustainable growth, for creating something that would benefit generations to come. That's the thing about true value. It's not always in what you can sell something for. Sometimes it's in what you can build, what you can protect, what you can pass on to the future. Sometimes the greatest wealth lies in having the patience to look beneath the surface and the wisdom to develop what you find responsibly. As for me, I was exactly where I needed to be, carrying forward a legacy that was worth far more than any number on a balance sheet. The land that my family had dismissed as worthless was changing the world, one careful step at a time. And somewhere I knew Granddad was smiling.